Welcome to the stage, Kate Vann. Oh, you got a big group here.
The investment tax credit, or the ITC, is a federal incentive for business investment. This applies to a variety of clean energy technologies, but tonight we're going to be talking about the 30% ITC that applies to solar projects. So what does 30% ITC even mean? If we think about the total cost of a solar project, about 90% of those costs are considered eligible costs. You multiply that by 30%, and that's your year one investment tax credit, which you can think about as a benefit or kind of a revenue to the project. So what are the costs of a solar project? Well, you have to buy modules, racking, inverters, transformers, pay interconnection upgrades, and you'll also pay a development fee to a company like New Leaf who develops that project for you. The IRS deems some of these costs as eligible and some of these costs as ineligible for this credit. So eligible costs are things like modules, inverters, transformers that are directly related to the production of clean electricity, but ineligible costs are things like fencing, roads, and civil grading, which aren't really related to that. So if we look at an example, if we had a $10 million project, maybe $9 million of costs are eligible, you multiply that by 30% and a $2.7 million tax credit. That's a huge boost to the project economics. So this 30% ITC, it was actually set to step down. So back in 2022, it was supposed to step down to 26%, then down to 22%, and then phase out to zero completely, so there would be no tax credit for solar projects. But then something happened in 2022 called the Inflation Reduction Act. So in 2022, the IRA was signed into law. And what the Inflation Reduction Act does is it reduces the government's budget deficit, lowers prescription drug prices, invests in domestic and cleaner energy, and also installs a 15% minimum tax on some corporations. So under the IRA, the 30% tax credit was extended all the way out to 2032, and then it will phase out from there. In addition to this baseline 30% tax credit, there's also bonus tax credits available. So these are for things that are called energy communities, domestic content, and low income. So all of these credits are stackable, so theoretically a solar project could get up to 70% in tax credits. So the first category is going to be energy communities, so you can get an additional 10% if your project is sited on a brownfield, in a census tract with closed coal mines, or an area that meets certain fossil fuel employment thresholds and has unemployment rates exceeding the national average. So the first category of brownfields, what does that mean? That means if you site a solar project on any site with hazardous substance contamination or mine-scarred land. So if you put that solar project on this mine-scarred land, you get an additional 10% ITC. The next category is for coal closures in the United States. So this map, everything in green that you see is a census tract that has a coal closure or a census tract adjacent to a coal closure. So if you put a solar project anywhere in green, you get another 10% ITC. The next category that's going to be layered on top in pink, this is for areas that meet the fossil fuel employment threshold and have unemployment rates exceeding the national average. So again, if you put a solar project anywhere in pink, you get another 10% investment tax credit. The last category is for low-income projects, domestic content is the next category. So there's a plus 10% domestic content adder for steel and iron domestically produced, because remember the IRA is focused on domestic and cleaner energy. So if we drill into the requirements a little bit more and look at the components, the iron and steel needs to be 100% domestically produced, and then other manufactured products like modules and inverters need to be 45% domestically produced in 2025, and that steps up over time. And then the final category of low-income projects, that's a 10 to 20% bonus, and this is for projects located in or serving low-income communities as defined by the IRS. So this is not for all projects, this is for projects less than 5 megawatts AC, and they have to receive allocation from the IRS. So you can get a plus 10% adder if you're located in a low-income community or on Indian land, or a 20% adder if you serve low-income households, offering at least a 20% credit savings. So now that we know about these bonuses, let's look at an example with a 50% ITC. So if we have a $9 million of eligible costs, multiply that by 50%, because we're in an energy community, we use domestic content, we could get a $4.5 million investment tax credit. So that's a huge win for the project economics. So why does this matter? More ITCs mean more projects get built. If projects are forecasted to show negative returns, they're never going to get built. But with these additional ITC benefits, more developers like New Leaf are going to develop sites, and more investors are going to invest in them, which is a good thing. But post-election, there is some uncertainty. What's going to happen with the baseline ITC and the bonus adders in particular that we discussed that were added with the IRA? Only time will tell. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, man. We made it through the whole thing to the last slide. Oh, my goodness. That was awesome.